You're listening to Beyond the Sermon, the podcast of First Methodist Church in Collingswood, New Jersey. Our goal is not only to share our sermons, but to go beyond the sermon in conversation about what we're learning and what God is doing in our lives and in our community. This conversation is inspired by our 2022 Advent series, What Are We Waiting For? You can find more information about our church at fumccollingswood.org. Thanks for joining us for this conversation.
This week you were sharing about your family's traditions that you have when your in-laws come for Thanksgiving and having a early Christmas the day after Thanksgiving. And I was wondering how it was learning the traditions that, Meg grew up with, that your family was expected to participate in, or also the ones that you created as you formed your family. What was that like?
Yeah, it's always a process, right? Whenever a couple gets married, you're blending two families, and so there's, those first couple of years are kind of navigating the realities and the traditions and figuring out what's important to who and what are just things that you've done because you've done them. But they're not really, sacred cows, so to speak. Yeah. Things you can't touch. But, so, I think it went fairly well. I think part of the stuff for us was we never lived near Meg's family. When we first got married, her parents and her sister were living up in New Hampshire, and we got married and moved to Jackson, Mississippi. And so, we would go up there, we'd visit, but I guess even those first few years we didn't do Thanksgiving with them because it's too far to go from Mississippi to New Hampshire on a seminary student's budget.
Fair.
So we had to figure out among those holiday things, Thanksgiving, Christmas, those things, what are the things that matter? And so, what's it look like to find a turkey in Uganda? One time, Meg and I, this was our second term, we were trying to figure out, all right, what are we going to do for Thanksgiving dinner? We're not going to drive all the way to the Capitol this year. What are we going to do? She's like, well, I really would love to find somebody who has a turkey and buy it from them so we could, cook a turkey and do all that. And she's like, but I haven't really seen turkeys. And so then after Bible study one day that she was doing with some of the women in town, she was driving home and a big tom turkey just walked right in front of the car. And so she stopped the car, got out, starts asking around like, all right, who owns this turkey? Who owns this turkey? And eventually, found the person. And she's like, I want to buy your turkey. And he said, okay, you want me to give it to you right now? She said, no, we don't want it now. We want it in 2 or 3 weeks, whenever it was. And she's like, I'll give you some of the money now, and then I'll come back on this day and get the turkey and give you the rest of the money. And so she did, and they put it in the back of our Land Cruiser with its feet tied up so it couldn't go anywhere. Brought it home to the house we were living in and let it out for a while. And the dogs were kind of curious about what was going on. What was this thing? They were kind of scared of it. And then the watchman who was working for us and our boys slaughtered the turkey in the backyard and plucked it.
What's a watchman?
Oh, so we had somebody who would work on our property. He did gardening and stuff, but then also all the houses that we lived in had a wall and a gate.
Okay.
And so he would kind of screen who was coming to knock on our door. And
so you had personal security.
Yeah, pretty much.
That's amazing. I didn't know that.
Well, because in Uganda, even though we were in our American eyes, we were on a missionary budget.
Yeah.
We were raising all of our support, and so it was not necessarily commensurate with an American salary.
Yeah. But they
didn't know that. And so just by nature of being American, we were thought to
targets.
be wealthy, and in comparison to, some of the people living in the communities we were in, we were quite wealthy.
Yeah.
The fact that we had a car that we could drive put us in a bracket outside of most people's imagination, and so they would just help us kind of navigate those things, or they'd help translate for us sometimes if somebody came and we wanted to go talk with them and stuff, but they didn't speak English, and so
Gotcha.
that would help. So anyway, we had a turkey that Thanksgiving because Meg almost hit it with the car.
You're talking about how it's a process of finding out what these new traditions or which traditions continue on depending on the different seasons and environments that you were in. Has that helped you when serving different churches? And, each church family has their own traditions that they've done for a while. And how has that helped you navigate those waters of keeping the old but also moving forward?
Yeah, I think having to go through that process, when we got married, when we moved to Uganda, and then move into some different churches, it helps open you up to some other traditions that are really good. It can help you see that some of the things that you were doing weren't necessarily bad, but maybe there's a better alternative out there. You just weren't aware of it. So, like, for instance, it wasn't until I was at my last church that I had ever been to a longest night service, or they called it at that time a Blue Christmas service. I had never been to one of those before.
Wow.
And so it wasn't something we did in the church I grew up in, or any of the churches I had attended in the past. And so, but I found that to be a very meaningful thing. And so when we came up here to Collingswood last year, that was something I wanted to bring with me. This church hadn't done one of those in the past. They'd done something similar at different times of the year to remember, and but not a Christmas service. And so it was something I wanted to bring in last year, especially with how much loss people had experienced during the pandemic and that kind of stuff. And so, but I think serving different churches, attending different churches along the way, kind of helps you to see some of the other options that are out there for the way people celebrate and the different traditions that they bring in. And that can be a really great thing to help you kind of pick the best of all the different worlds. And one of the things that we always did in the church I grew up in was we always had a hanging of the greens service at the start of Advent, where during that service, I don't even know if it was a service really, or if it was just a time we got together, but we'd decorate the church and put out all the decorations and have some Christmas cookies together or something. And so I always remember that happening, but none of the churches I've served as a pastor have had that kind of thing. And so it's not necessarily right or wrong. I don't feel like I need to bring that to every church, but it is something I remember from my childhood growing up down there in Barnesboro. What are some of the traditions that have changed over the course of your life? Maybe things you didn't do as a kid that you do now, or things that you didn't do but Rebecca's family did and have become part of your time, your celebrations together.
So we've tried to create some of our own traditions that came from neither of our childhoods, just so that it feels more like ours. And so one tradition I try to uphold is that at some point in the Christmas season, we watch Santa Claus Conquers the Martians, which is like
roll that one back. What's it called?
Santa Claus Conquers the Martians. I think it's from like 1965.
Okay.
And it is touted as one of the like worst movies of all time, like plot and set design and just like poorly made movie. It's one of those things where like it's been on Mystery Theater 3000 or whatever.
Yeah.
And it's just always entertaining to see how horrible it is. Santa Claus smoking a bubble pipe, and Martian kids just literally kids with a helmet on their head painted green, but it's black and white. So like It's just kids in a helmet. Anyway, so that's one thing. The biggest thing that I've had to adjust with is our family sizes are very, very different. And so my family, we would get together one time on Christmas Eve or Christmas Day, and it would be about like 8 to 10 family members, and that would be our Christmas gathering. Where Rebecca's family, I believe we do 3 Christmas gatherings for her one family, and as big as 26 people. And then she goes, yeah, but then we need to have another one for just the family. And
meaning her family of origin, like her nuclear family.
Her nuclear family and spouses and children. So now just the family is 18 people. And in my mind, I'm thinking, okay, why not just include the other 6 people, and then there you go. You just have one gathering. So we have multiple Christmas gatherings for the family, and I'm always just like trying to adjust and remember like this is what they do, and yeah. So that's one of, in regards to church traditions. I've also really enjoyed the longest night service, which I grew up with at Pittman UMC. We had that every single year, at least as far as I can remember. What day is it this year?
The 21st.
21st. What time's our service?
7 o'clock.
7 o'clock.
7 o'clock on December 21st. It'll be here in the sanctuary. We'll also live stream it for those who can't make it in person.
Good.
And want to be part of it.
Yeah, and I highly recommend anyone that's going through the mourning process of someone that passed this year or, recently. Sometimes, mourning is a long process. And so, I'd highly recommend participating in that if you're able to. Into the actual sermon you preached versus just talking about the traditions that you held or hold with your in-laws. You were talking about how everyone can relate to hiding from God. And so I was curious, when was a time that you tried to hide from God? And for those that haven't heard the sermon yet, reflecting on Adam and Eve after they ate from the fruit, that they were trying to hide from God because they were ashamed of themselves.
I think one of the times was when we came back from Uganda, and there was a whole lot that went into that decision that I'm not going to get into here on the podcast, but coming back and feeling like we had failed as missionaries, that we couldn't handle it, that all these lies chirping in our ears about not being able to hack it, or that because we had chosen to leave there because we needed to leave there, God was done using us. There wasn't any way. And so I just kind of, for a while, wanted to hide from God. I wanted to kind of just curl in and self-protect, and didn't want to engage because of the stuff that I needed to deal with and the things I needed to work through. And but eventually God broke through all that and did a lot of work in us and in our marriage and all that kind of stuff. And a mentor of mine is kind of the reason that ministry, again, pastoral ministry in particular, ever even came back onto the table. And so God did a lot there, but there was definitely a season in that where I just wanted to hide from him.
Yeah. And for those that are new to the podcast, when Scott ever says mentor, he means Ron Smith.
Not every time, but a lot of times.
Yeah. And no, I appreciate you sharing that, because when people think of international missionaries specifically, it's they have flawless relationships with God if they're able to take that step of faith and go out. And so they can't imagine there being a season where it isn't always, beautiful. Like, yes, you're going through rough patches, but your faith in God just makes it easier, at least, to go through those things. And so, I think that's an important thing to discuss and share. In my own walk, I don't even know if this one really relates, but there's times where I see what God has provided in my life, and I feel so unworthy that I almost start to detach myself, in the sense of I'm ashamed that I feel like I haven't earned it, or I'm unworthy of it. And so it's almost like I don't know how.
Yeah, well, that's grace, though, right?
Yeah,
because we can't ever earn it, and yet God continues to lavish His love upon us. Paul says that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us, and but I think what you're trying to describe is something we all experience at some level if we're aware of just how much we've received from God and just how much we don't deserve that.
Yeah. And so I feel like I want to hide from Him, in the sense of like, give it to someone else that's deserving of it.
Yeah.
And so, in regards to like, I think, I could go into like the specifics of something I'd done and was shameful, but it's the knowledge of knowing all the bad things I've done, that the accumulation of that and being confronted with all that God has blessed me with, that combination is what really makes me kind of just want to shrivel up into a ball. God is just so good.
Yeah, and so it's not necessarily that we are always hiding from God because we fear a punishment or a consequence.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's because we know we don't deserve what we have been given.
Yeah. And seeing in Scripture, like God's wrath, that justly so, and by Him being the ultimate judge, we know what we deserve for what we've done. And that's the absolute beauty of grace. Well, one of the things we're very blessed with, especially in this area, is a phenomenal medical care system. Which is true.
It is
Philadelphia,
true. Absolutely.
New York
We've
area.
got some of the best doctors in the world around the corner.
People come from all over, and our beloved Pastor Scott Rambo is getting a shoulder surgery tomorrow, but when you listen to this, it would be the past Tuesday. And so curious, what happened? What's wrong with you?
What's wrong with me? We don't have time on the podcast to get into all of that, Jeremy.
What's wrong with your shoulder? What are they going to do?
My shoulder, yes. Yeah,
and why are you trusting me to preach 3 weeks in a row?
So what they're gonna do is they're gonna go in arthroscopically and repair a tear in my rotator cuff. They're going to do some work on the AC joint, which is where the clavicle and the shoulder blade kind of connect, and clean up some things in there. They're going to repair my torn labrum, and they're going to move my biceps tendon from where it attaches at the labrum to some spot in my humerus. They're just going to re-engineer where my bicep tendon connects. And anything else that they find when they go in there that didn't show up on the MRI, they're going to check out everything.
So improvised surgery.
Yeah. But they're not replacing anything. They're not adding anything. They're just kind of cleaning up and repairing what's there. Mm-hmm. And so most recently, what aggravated this injury was, throwing a ball with my boys this spring. You know, they were playing Little League and flag football and doing all this stuff. And it kind of re-aggravated something that I experienced in 2017. Again, throwing a ball with the boys and stuff.
Yeah.
But ultimately, I think it goes back to a motorcycle accident I had when we were in Uganda, where I kind of got edged off the road by a truck coming around a curve and slid down the bank of the road and ended up going out. I tried to brace myself and the bike with my elbow, and that kind of jammed everything up. And so I think that kind of frayed some things and tore some things, and then just over time, when I heard it in 2017, it was just kind of like the straw that broke the camel's back, and I was able to do PT and get it back to a healthy point again. And then just this spring was just kind of, again, that you pushed it too far, and I tried doing PT all summer and through the fall and to avoid surgery, but it just wasn't happening this time. There's too much structural stuff in there that needs to be addressed. So that's what they're going to be doing. And, and I'm trusting you to preach for the next 3 weeks, because I think God has good things he wants to say through you. And I think he's brought you here to FUMC at this season for a reason. And I'm excited to see how he's going to use it. It's not just because you were the only other pastor on staff.
Yeah, no. As nervous as I am, I'm very, very excited. And so how can we as FUMC Collingswood support you in however long your recovery may be?
Yeah, so I think the big thing is just having grace for the process. I'm going to be in a sling and brace probably for 6 weeks.
Wow.
So that doesn't mean I'm going to be home in the recliner for that whole 6 weeks. At some point I'll start coming back into the office and doing stuff around the church again. But just having grace that I might not be able to respond to everything right away. It might take some time before I can, even type an email one-handed. Those kind of things. But we'll get there. And I'd ask that you pray for Meg and the boys as they adjust to this reality. It's kind of a weird thing when the dad who's been able to do everything suddenly can't do stuff, and start looking to Big Brother and other people to do some of the heavy lifting around the house and that kind of stuff. It's interesting dynamics, and the boys have done great with it because they've had to walk through some of that with Meg and her muscular dystrophy and stuff. So I think they're handling it maybe better than they would have if this was the first time they were dealing with something like that. But pray for them and pray for Meg. I'll be a good patient in the sense of doing everything the doctor tells me to or the physical therapist tells me to. But, I'm not necessarily wired to sit in one room for 6 weeks, as introverted as I can be. So, just that God would give her the grace to deal with me, and that I'd still be able to be what I need to be for her and the family and eventually the church.
And if you, the listener, have any prayer requests, please reach out to us via the office. You can get our contact through the church website as well, fumccollingswood.org, so that we can walk alongside you. And if you'd like it to be on the prayer list for the whole church to pray for you, we'd be happy to do that for you. Until next time, do we have a catchphrase?
No.
Until next time.
Feliz Navidad.